That evening my wife decided to humiliate me right at the dinner table. In front of our friends and relatives she raised her glass and, smiling, announced that she had filed for divorce and already found a man on a real level. Everyone laughed. Everyone thought I would break. I just looked at her and quietly said, "You made your move. Now it's my turn. Subscribe to the channel, hit like, and leave a comment about what you would have done in my place." The story is only beginning. We were sitting at a long table covered with expensive wine and dishes that I had paid for. My 50th birthday, supposed to be a celebration, but the atmosphere was boiling. The room felt heavy, not only from the candles, but from her fake laughter. I watched the guests. Some turned away, some pretended not to hear, and a few chuckled into their hands. Sarah, my wife for the last 12 years, shone like a movie star. Golden dress, the ring I had given her, and ice in her eyes. I sat calmly, slowly swirling my glass of whiskey, and felt silence growing inside me. Not anger, not panic, an icy silence. She pulled out her phone and, without hiding it, showed her friend a chat with some Michael. The laughter at the table grew louder. "See," she said, "this man makes me happy. Not like some people." All eyes turned to me. I saw mockery, pity, the expectation that I would explode. But I only leaned back in my chair. There was ridicule in her voice, but in my silence there was something else, the sense of an approaching storm. I didn't say a word. I stood up from the table, carefully set down my napkin, and looked straight into her eyes. The room fell silent. Music played faintly in the corner, but it felt as if the whole place had gone quiet. I walked over to her and said, "You think I don't know anything, but today you made a mistake." She laughed again, loud and showy, but I heard a tremor in her voice. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a small envelope, and set it down in front of her. "This is my gift. Just don't open it here. Do it at home, alone." She tried to joke again, but her voice cracked. The guests exchanged looks. I turned to them, gave a nod, and calmly left the room. Silence trailed behind me, heavy and echoing. Everyone thought I had lost. Everyone thought I had left defeated. But they didn't know, the real strike was only beginning. The night after that dinner, the air in my house felt different, heavy, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the sky holds its breath. Sarah didn't come home right away, which didn't surprise me. I pictured her sitting in her car, staring at that envelope, wondering if she should open it or toss it into the nearest trash bin. But I knew her. Curiosity had always been her weakness, stronger than vanity, stronger even than greed. By the time she walked through the door, her heels clicking too loudly on the marble floor, her face gave her away. The carefully painted smile she had worn in public was gone. Her eyes were wide, searching, calculating. She held the envelope like it was radioactive, like it might detonate and take her with it. I sat in the living room with a glass of bourbon in my hand, the lamp casting shadows across the room. The television was on but muted, nothing more than background light. She looked at me for a long moment, waiting for me to speak, but I didn't. Silence was my weapon, sharper than any insult. She finally broke it. "What is this? Where did you get it?" Her voice cracked just a little at the edges, and that single crack was worth all the humiliation she had tried to heap on me earlier. I took a slow sip of bourbon before answering, my eyes never leaving hers. "Information," I said. "Old stories. Things your family hoped would stay buried." Her hands shook slightly as she clutched the envelope. She wanted to throw it back at me. I could see it, but the fear of not knowing was stronger than her pride. She turned on her heel and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. The house fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that carries more weight than any argument. I stayed where I was, sipping my drink, letting her imagination do the work for me. A man who knows he has already won doesn't need to shout. Around midnight, I heard her pacing upstairs. Drawers opening, closet doors shutting, the frantic rhythm of someone trying to regain control. I imagined her sitting on the bed, tearing into the envelope, pulling out every page, her eyes scanning the words, the photos, the documents. The past she thought was locked away, forever staring back at her in black and white. When she finally came back downstairs, her face was pale, almost translucent, her makeup smeared from tears she had tried to hide. She looked less like the queen of the dinner table and more like a frightened girl caught stealing. "You don't understand," she whispered, though the desperation in her tone told me that I understood plenty. "You can't use this. It's dangerous." I leaned back, resting the glass on the arm of the chair, studying her. "Dangerous for who?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just stood there, breathing hard, clenching the papers in her hand like they were the only thing keeping her upright. The following morning, the phone started ringing before sunrise. First it was her mother, then her father, then a string of unfamiliar numbers. I didn't pick up a single call. I shaved, dressed, made myself coffee, and read the paper like it was any other day. Sarah sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched, her eyes fixed on me with something between hatred and fear. "They want to talk to you," she said finally, her voice brittle. "Then they know how to find me," I replied. I folded the paper and finished my coffee, enjoying the way she flinched at my calmness. She was waiting for me to yell, to accuse, to rage like a man who had just been betrayed. But rage is messy. Rage is blind. I preferred precision. At the office later that morning, I acted as if nothing had changed. Meetings, conference calls, files stacked neatly on my desk. My assistant knocked once and entered with a puzzled look. "Your wife has called 3 times, she said carefully, "and someone identifying themselves as Senator Walsh has left 2 messages. I smiled, a small, calm smile that only deepened her confusion. "Take messages," I said. "I'll get back to them when I have time." My assistant hesitated, then nodded, though I could see the questions forming in her eyes. I didn't explain. Explanations are for the weak. By noon, the texts were flooding in. Some were threats, some were pleas, some were promises of negotiation if only I'd agree to talk. I let them pile up unanswered, every ignored message another twist of the knife. Around 3 o'clock, Sarah herself stormed into my office, ignoring the startled look on the receptionist's face. She closed the door behind her and slammed the envelope on my desk. Her voice was sharp, shrill, breaking under the weight of panic. "You're going to ruin all of us. Don't you see? This isn't just about me anymore." I looked at the envelope, then at her, then calmly pushed it back across the desk with one finger. "It was never just about you," I said. Her shoulders sagged as if the weight of the words finally hit her. She opened her mouth to argue, to plead, but nothing came out. She grabbed the envelope again, clutching it to her chest, and walked out without another word. I watched her go, and for the first time in years, I felt no anger, no grief, only clarity. That night, as I poured myself another glass of bourbon, I realized something important. Everyone at that dinner table thought I was broken, humiliated, defeated. What they didn't realize was that silence can be louder than rage. Patience can be sharper than revenge shouted in public. And as I leaned back in my chair, the city lights glowing outside my window, I understood one truth. The storm had only begun, and I was the one holding the thunder. The next days unfolded like a carefully arranged game of chess. Each move deliberate, each silence louder than any declaration. Sarah was unraveling, though she tried to hide it behind expensive dresses, hollow smiles, and the occasional cruel remark when someone was watching. But when it was just the 2 of us in the house, her mask slipped. She jumped at the sound of the phone. She double-locked the doors. She whispered into her mobile late at night, as if even the walls could betray her. I watched it all with the calm detachment of a man who already knew how the story would end. The documents I had slipped into that envelope were only a fraction of what I had gathered over the years. I had suspected for a long time that she was playing her own game, weaving secrets behind my back. At first I ignored it, telling myself that it was just insecurity, that marriage always carried its shadows. But then shadows turned into whispers, whispers into traces, and traces into proof. Quietly, methodically, I collected everything. Bank transfers that didn't add up, trips that had no real destination, meetings with people whose names carried more weight than I had realized. And behind it all, her family, powerful, well-connected, and dirty to the core. Sarah thought she was untouchable because of them. She thought I was just the husband, a man too comfortable in his career and his routines to ever pose a threat. She was wrong. The more pressure I applied through silence, the more mistakes she made. She started calling old contacts, people I already knew were under scrutiny. She arranged secret meetings, not realizing I had people watching her. Not professionals but acquaintances who owed me favors. Every new move she made painted her deeper into a corner. The irony was delicious. Her arrogance, the very thing she had wielded like a weapon, was now the rope tightening around her neck. One evening she finally confronted me again, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. She stood in the living room, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline, her eyes red. "What do you want?" she asked, and for the first time there was no sarcasm, no bite, only fear. I took my time answering. I set down the book I had been reading, removed my glasses, and looked at her. "I want nothing," I said. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you've already done. And now, Sarah, it's out of your hands." She sank into the armchair opposite me, her body small, folded in on itself. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They won't let this go. If you push it, you're not just destroying me, you're destroying yourself." I leaned forward, letting the words sink in. "You made sure of that when you decided to play both sides. You thought you could betray me and still keep their trust. But now they'll know you failed. And failure is something they don't forgive." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. The calls from her family grew more desperate. Some offered money, some threatened legal destruction. Others hinted at consequences that went beyond courts and contracts. I didn't answer a single one. Each ignored call fed the silence that was driving them mad. My colleagues at work began to notice too. Whispers in the hallways, guarded glances, people suddenly treating me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. I let them wonder. Rumors are powerful weapons when you don't bother to correct them. By the end of the week, Sarah looked like a ghost. She hardly ate, she hardly slept, and every time I walked into a room she flinched as if expecting another envelope to land in her lap. But I didn't give her one. Not yet. Instead, I let her suffocate in her own imagination, in the fear of what else I might have, of who else I might have spoken to. Then came the night she broke. I found her in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, the lights dim, a bottle of wine half drained in front of her. Papers were spread across the table, some from the envelope, others she must have dug up herself in a desperate attempt to piece together a strategy. When she saw me, she didn't snap, didn't sneer. She just looked at me with hollow eyes and said, "Help me." 2 words, simple, stripped of pride, stripped of everything she used to shield herself with. For a moment I almost felt pity. Almost. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down across from her. "It's too late for that," I said. "You set this in motion the moment you stood at that table and laughed in my face. I gave you a chance to stop, Sarah. You didn't take it." Her hands shook as she lifted the glass of wine, spilling some on the papers. "Then what happens now?" she whispered. I took a long breath, studying her, and then delivered the truth. "Now you live with the consequences, and so do they." In the days that followed, the silence broke. Not by me, but by them. Her family made their first public mistake. A slip in the press, a crack in their carefully polished image. I didn't have to lift a finger. The storm had gained its own momentum, and I was simply standing in the eye, untouched, watching as everything she had tried to use against me turned inward. She moved out of the house quietly, without another dramatic speech, without another staged performance. No lawyers, no theatrics, just suitcases in the night and the faint slam of a car door. I didn't stop her. I didn't need to, because by then I had already won. And as I sat in the empty house, the city quiet outside, I realized the truth. Revenge doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is the one carried out in whispers, in silences, in letting the other person destroy themselves while you simply stand back and watch. And that was exactly what I intended to keep doing, because the game wasn't over yet. Not for Sarah, not for her family, and certainly not for me. The pieces were still moving, and I was the one guiding the board. The house felt larger without her in it, though emptier too, and for the first time in years I could hear my own thoughts echoing through the rooms without interruption. There was no sharp laughter from upstairs, no hurried clatter of heels on the staircase, no forced conversations over dinner, just silence, steady and heavy, but not uncomfortable. I found that I liked it. I woke up earlier than usual, brewed my coffee in peace, and walked through the halls as if reclaiming territory that had been occupied for too long. Yet beneath the calm exterior, the storm still moved. Sarah's departure was not the end of it. It was only the beginning of the collapse. What she left behind was not just her absence but a trail of panic that spread far beyond the walls of this house. Her family was unraveling just as quickly as she had, their empire fraying at the edges. I watched it play out in the newspapers, in the markets, in whispered conversations between men who once spoke their name with reverence but now did so with hesitation. The documents I had held on to were not meant to be weapons in themselves but triggers, small sparks dropped into dry grass. And once the fire caught, there was no stopping it. I remember one morning in particular when the weight of it all settled on me in a strange way. I was reading the financial section of the paper and saw their company's name linked to an investigation. It was subtle, just a few lines buried in the middle of the article, but I knew what it meant. The fire had reached the walls of their fortress. They would scramble, of course. Men like them always did. They would call in favors, silence journalists, push politicians into their corner. But there is only so much power can do when the cracks run too deep. Sarah called me that evening. Her voice was trembling, though she tried to steady it. "Are you happy now?" she asked. "Is this what you wanted?" I listened to the question for a long moment before replying. "I didn't want this," I said calmly. "I simply let the truth breathe. The rest was inevitable." There was silence on the line, a silence thick with hatred and fear, and then she hung up. At work, the atmosphere had shifted. Colleagues who once barely noticed me now watched closely, as if trying to read secrets from my expression. My boss called me into his office one afternoon and shut the door. "You've been in the papers without being in them," he said, studying me with sharp eyes. "Care to explain?" I gave him nothing. I simply smiled politely, shrugged, and told him I preferred to keep personal matters out of the office. He didn't press further, though I could see the unease in his face. People fear what they don't understand, and right now I was an enigma in their eyes. That suited me perfectly. Meanwhile, Sarah's desperation grew. She began sending messages late at night, some begging, some threatening, others incoherent with anger. One message simply read, "They're blaming me." Another, "You don't know what they'll do." But I did know. I knew exactly how people like her family operated. They never accepted responsibility themselves. They always found someone else to bleed for their mistakes. Sarah, with her arrogance and her failures, had made herself the perfect scapegoat. She was learning the cruelest lesson of all, that loyalty in their world was an illusion, shattered the moment it became inconvenient. And so, piece by piece, her safety net dissolved. One night, I received an unexpected visitor. An older man, dressed impeccably, the kind of man who belonged more in boardrooms and private clubs than on my doorstep. He introduced himself politely, though I already knew who he was, a fixer for her family, someone who had cleaned up more than one scandal in his time. We sat in the living room, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. "We'd like to resolve this quietly," he said, his tone smooth but edged with steel. "No one benefits from escalation. Walk away, and you'll be left in peace." I studied him carefully before answering. "Peace is not yours to give," I said. "You don't own me, and you certainly don't scare me." His smile faltered, just for a second, before he regained composure. He left without shaking my hand, and I knew then that the lines had been drawn. They would come at me not with polite negotiations anymore, but with desperation. That was fine. Desperation makes people reckless, and recklessness makes them vulnerable. The following weeks were a test of endurance. Strange cars parked too long on the street outside. Unfamiliar faces in restaurants where I dined. Anonymous letters slipped under my door. But none of it shook me. If anything, it only confirmed that I was holding the right cards. They wanted me to feel hunted, cornered, weak. Instead, I felt stronger with each attempt, because each act of intimidation told me they feared what I might still reveal. And they were right to fear it. Sarah reached out again during this time not with anger but with exhaustion. She asked to meet in person, at a cafe far from the city center. I agreed, curious rather than cautious. When I saw her, I barely recognized the woman sitting at the table. Her hair was unkempt, her face pale, her posture slouched as though the weight of the world pressed on her shoulders. "They've abandoned me," she said, her voice flat. "You've won." I looked at her for a long moment and finally replied, "This was never about winning. It was about truth." She laughed then, a bitter, broken laugh. "Truth doesn't matter in their world," she whispered. "Only power." I leaned forward slightly, letting my words cut through her despair. Then perhaps it's time their world learned otherwise. As I walked away from that meeting, I realized that Sarah was no longer my adversary. She was a casualty of her own choices, a pawn discarded by the very people she thought protected her. The real battle was with those who had built their empire on shadows and lies. And I intended to see it crumble, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but silence. The silence I had always carried with me, the silence that had become my greatest weapon. The game was far from over, but now the board was mine to control. And as the city lights flickered in the distance, I knew that every move they made from here on out would only tighten the noose around their own throats.